The day began like any other. Sunlight streamed through windows, coffee makers gurgled to life. But something was wrong. A strange silence filled every home. People reached for their phones on bedside tables. Their hands found only empty space. The small glowing rectangles were gone. Not just one or two, but all of them. Everywhere. A wave of confusion washed over the world. People checked their pockets again and again. They looked under pillows and behind sofas. The devices that held their lives had simply vanished into thin air. It was a quiet, personal panic, repeated in millions of bedrooms at once. In kitchens, the morning routine fell apart. No one could check the news headlines while waiting for toast. No one could scroll through social media feeds. Families sat at breakfast tables in an odd quiet. They looked at each other instead of at their screens. Children asked where their phones were. Parents had no answers. The sudden lack of distraction was unsettling. It felt like a power cut, but for information and connection, the world outside the window seemed distant. Without a phone, how would anyone know what was happening? The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud with unanswered questions and a growing sense of unease. Out on the streets, the change was immediately visible. People walked with their heads up. They looked around, their eyes wide with uncertainty. Commuters on trains and buses sat awkwardly. They had nothing to do with their hands, no podcasts to listen to, no games to play. They made eye contact by accident, then quickly looked away. It was a shared, unspoken experience. Everyone was feeling the same loss. The city, usually a place of individual bubbles, became a space of collective bewilderment. The familiar hum of notifications was gone, replaced by the simple sounds of footsteps and traffic. At work, the chaos truly began. Offices were filled with people talking at once. How could they check their emails? How could they join video calls with colleagues in other cities? The digital tools they relied on were gone. Calendars were empty. Contact lists were inaccessible. The entire structure of the modern workday collapsed in a few hours. People gathered around the few remaining desktop computers. They realized how much they depended on the little devices in their pockets. The day's work had not even started, but it already felt impossible. The Great Vanishing had unplugged not just individuals, but the entire engine of global commerce. The first few days were a struggle. People had to relearn old ways of doing things. To talk to a friend, you had to walk to their house. You had to hope they were home. Or you could use a landline phone, if you still had one, and could remember the number. Maps were pulled out of dusty cupboards. People asked strangers for directions again. There was a lot of pointing and describing landmarks. Getting lost became a common adventure. Simple tasks, like finding a recipe or checking the weather, required planning. Life slowed down. It had to. The instant answers we were used to were no longer available. For young people, the change was huge. Schools had to adapt quickly. Without online resources, teachers used blackboards and printed books more. Students talked to each other during breaks instead of looking at screens. They passed notes in class, a forgotten art. At home, teenagers were bored. They rediscovered board games and hobbies they had long forgotten. They spent more time with their families, talking and sharing stories. It was difficult at first. There were arguments and frustrations, but slowly a new kind of connection began to form. It was a connection built on shared time, not shared links. Shopping became a different experience. You couldn't just order things online, you had to go to the shops. High streets and local markets became busy again. People talked to shopkeepers. They asked for recommendations. They touched the products before they bought them. It was a more physical and social way to shop. Without digital payments, cash made a comeback. People had to plan their purchases more carefully. Window shopping became a popular pastime. The simple act of buying groceries turned into an opportunity for a chat with a neighbor you met in the aisle. Finding out the news was also a challenge. Without social media feeds and news apps, people turned to older sources. They listened to the radio. They watched the evening news on television together. Newspaper sales soared. People gathered in public places to discuss the day's events. News traveled more slowly, but perhaps it was understood more deeply. Communities had to rely on local notice boards and town criers for important announcements. Information became a shared resource again, something to be discussed and debated face to face, not just consumed alone on a screen. The absence of smartphones brought clear benefits. Conversations changed. At dinner tables and in cafes, People were more present. They listened more carefully. They looked at the person they were talking to. Without the constant interruption of notifications, discussions could go deeper. Friendships felt more meaningful. You had to make a real effort to see someone. This effort made the time you spent together more valuable. People rediscovered the joy of uninterrupted face-to-face communication. The world felt more focused. The constant buzz of digital life was replaced by a calmer, more mindful pace. However, there were serious downsides. The loss of connection was a real problem for many. People with family in other countries felt suddenly cut off. It was hard to share photos of a new baby or to see a loved one's face. Long-distance relationships became incredibly difficult. For those who were isolated, like the elderly or people with disabilities, smartphones had been a vital link to the outside world. Without them, loneliness increased. The digital communities that had offered support and friendship disappeared overnight. The world became a much larger and more lonely place for some. Workplaces faced a massive crisis. Modern business relied on instant communication. Without it, projects stalled, supply chains broke down. International collaboration became nearly impossible. People who worked from home were completely cut off. They had to find new ways to connect with their offices. The economy suffered. Many businesses that depended on apps and online services failed. The world of work was forced to become more local and less global. This created new opportunities for local businesses, but it also caused a lot of economic pain and uncertainty for millions of workers. The lack of access to information was another major challenge. We had forgotten how much we relied on our phones for everything. From checking a bus timetable to looking up a medical symptom, the answers were always in our pocket. Without that instant access, life became more difficult and sometimes more dangerous. Imagine not being able to call for help in an emergency, or not being able to find the nearest hospital. We had outsourced so much of our memory and our practical knowledge to our devices. Losing them meant we had to rebuild those skills from scratch, and that was a slow and often frustrating process. Families began to change in profound ways. Without the distraction of individual screens, evenings became a time for shared activities. Parents and children read books together. They cooked meals from scratch. They played music or simply talked about their day. Of course, it wasn't always perfect. There were more arguments as people learned to live with each other in this new, intense way. But over time, many families found a stronger bond. They were forced to solve problems together and to entertain each other. The home became the center of social life again, a place of shared experiences rather than a collection of separate digital worlds. Schools and educational institutions had to reinvent themselves. They moved away from digital learning and back to more traditional methods. Libraries became central hubs of knowledge once more. Students learned research skills using encyclopedias and printed journals. Group projects required real collaboration in the same room, not just in a shared document. Teachers reported that students were more focused in class. Their attention spans seemed to be getting longer. While the loss of online resources was a challenge, it also created an opportunity to focus on critical thinking and interpersonal skills in a more direct and engaging way. Businesses had to adapt or perish. The global became local. Local shops thrived as people could no longer rely on massive online retailers. Companies had to communicate with customers through newsletters, posters, and local radio adverts. Face-to-face customer service became important again. This created a more personal and accountable form of commerce. While the global economy struggled, local economies began to strengthen. Communities became more self-reliant. People started to know their local baker, butcher, and bookseller by name. A sense of a local village lost for so long started to re-emerge from the digital dust. Ultimately, the Great Vanishing taught us a powerful lesson. It showed us what we had gained from our technology, but also what we had lost. It reminded us that technology is a tool, not a replacement for human connection. We learned that while being connected online is useful, being present in the real world is essential. A hopeful message emerged from the silence. Perhaps we didn't need to live completely without our devices, but if they ever came back, maybe we would use them differently. We would value the person in front of us more than the notifications in our hand. We would remember the importance of looking up,